The story of Nehemiah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. The story of Nehemiah begins in the distant land of Persia, where many Jews were living in exile. Although some of them had returned to Jerusalem after King Cyrus of Persia allowed the rebuilding of the temple, the city itself remained in ruins. Its walls were broken down, its gates burned, and its people vulnerable to attack. The disgrace of the once great city weighed heavily on the hearts of the Jews, but none felt this burden as keenly as Nehemiah, a Jewish man serving as the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. One day, Nehemiah received troubling news from his brother Hanani, who had visited Jerusalem. "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace," Hanani said. "The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." When Nehemiah heard these words, his heart broke for his people and his city. He wept, mourned, and fasted for days, pouring out his sorrow before God in prayer. "Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night, for your servants, the people of Israel." Nehemiah confessed the sins of his people. Though he was afraid, he trusted God. When King Artaxerxes noticed Nehemiah's sadness and asked the reason for it, Nehemiah prayed silently for courage, and then explained, "Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king was moved by Nehemiah's plea, and asked what he wanted. Nehemiah boldly requested permission to travel to Jerusalem and rebuild its walls. Not only did the king grant his request, but he also provided letters of safe passage and resources for the project. Nehemiah recognized that it was God's hand that had made the king so favorable to his plan. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he took time to inspect the city's walls by night, assessing the damage in secret. He then gathered the leaders and people and shared his vision. "You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Inspired by his leadership, the people replied, "Let us start rebuilding." The work began, but it was not without challenges. Surrounding enemies, including Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, mocked and ridiculed their efforts. "What are these feeble Jews doing?" they sneered. "Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Despite the taunts, Nehemiah encouraged the people to persevere. "The God of heaven will give us success," he declared. As the work progressed, the opposition grew more severe. The enemies plotted to attack and disrupt the rebuilding, but Nehemiah responded with wisdom and prayer. He stationed guards and armed the workers, saying, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes." The people worked with all their hearts, often laboring with tools in one hand and weapons in the other. Nehemiah kept their spirits high, reminding them that God was with them. Despite the constant threats, the wall was completed in just 52 days, a remarkable achievement that filled the people with awe and confidence. When the enemies saw the finished wall, they were humiliated, realizing that the work had been accomplished with the help of God. Nehemiah's faith and leadership had united the people in accomplishing what seemed impossible. After the wall was rebuilt, Nehemiah and the people turned their attention to spiritual renewal. Under the guidance of Ezra the priest, the law of Moses was read aloud to the assembly. Men, women, and children listened attentively, some hearing God's word for the first time. As the people understood the law, they were convicted of their sins and began to weep. But Nehemiah and Ezra encouraged them, saying, "Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The people celebrated with great joy, sharing food and drink, and observing the Feast of Tabernacles as they had not done in generations. Nehemiah's story is one of faith, perseverance, and leadership. It reminds us that when we seek God's guidance and rely on His strength, even the most daunting tasks can be accomplished. Nehemiah's reliance on prayer and his determination to do God's work inspired not only the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, but also the spiritual revival of its people. The rebuilding of the wall was more than a physical project. It was a symbol of God's faithfulness and the restoration of His people. Through Nehemiah, God showed that even in times of despair and opposition, His plans for His people will prevail.